Book 2, Chapter 4 of This Side of Paradise. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Book 2, Chapter 4, The Supercilious Sacrifice. Atlantic City. Amory paced the boardwalk at day's end, lulled by the everlasting surge of changing waves, smelling the half-mournful odor of the salt breeze. The sea, he thought, had treasured its memories deeper than the faithless land. It seemed still to whisper of Norse galleys ploughing the water-world under raven-figured flags, of the British dreadnoughts, gray bulwarks of civilization steaming up through the fog of one dark July into the North Sea. "Well, Amory Blaine!" Amory looked down into the street below. A low racing car had drawn to a stop, and a familiar, cheerful face protruded from the driver's seat. "Come on down, goofer!" cried Alec. Amory called a greeting, and descending a flight of wooden steps approached the car. He and Alec had been meeting intermittently, but the barrier of Roseland lay always between them. He was sorry for this. He hated to lose Alec. "Mr. Blaine, this is Miss Watterson, Miss Wayne, and Mr. Tully." "How do you do?" "Amory," said Alec exuberantly, "if you'll jump in, we'll take you to some secluded nook and give you a wee jolt of bourbon." Amory considered. "That's an idea. Step in. Move over, Jill, and Amory will smile very handsomely at you." Amory squeezed into the back seat beside a gaudy, vermilion-lipped blonde. "Hello, Doug Fairbanks," she said flippantly. "Walking for exercise or hunting for company?" "I was counting the waves," replied Amory gravely. "I'm going in for statistics." "Don't kid me, Doug." When they reached an unfrequented side street, Alec stopped the car among deep shadows. "What are you doing down here these cold days, Amory?" he demanded as he produced a quart of bourbon from under the fur rug. Amory avoided the question. Indeed, he had had no definite reason for coming to the coast. "Do you remember that party of ours, sophomore year?" he asked instead. "Do I? When we slept in the pavilions up in Asbury Park? Lord, Alec, it's hard to think that Jessie and Dick and Carrie are all three dead." Alec shivered. "Don't talk about it. These dreary fall days depress me enough." Jill seemed to agree. "Doug here is sort of gloomy anyways," she commented. "Tell him to drink deep. It's good and scarce these days." "What I really want to ask you, Amory, is where you are." "Why, New York, I suppose." "I mean to night, because if you haven't got a room yet, you'd better help me out." "Glad to." "You see, Tully and I have 2 rooms with bath between at the Rainier, and he's got to go back to New York. I don't want to have to move. Question is, will you occupy one of the rooms?" Amory was willing if he could get in right away. "You'll find the key in the office. The rooms are in my name." Declining further locomotion or further stimulation, Amory left the car and sauntered back along the boardwalk to the hotel. He was in an eddy again, a deep, lethargic gulf, without desire to work or write, love or dissipate. For the first time in his life he rather longed for death to roll over his generation, obliterating their petty fevers and struggles and exultations. His youth seemed never so vanished as now in the contrast between the utter loneliness of this visit and that riotous, joyful party of 4 years before. Things that had been the merest commonplaces of his life then, deep sleep, the sense of beauty around him, all desire had flown away, and the gaps they left were filled only with the great listlessness of his disillusion. To hold a man, a woman has to appeal to the worst in him. This sentence was the thesis of most of his bad nights, of which he felt this was to be one. His mind had already started to play variations on the subject. Tireless passion, fierce jealousy, longing to possess and crush, these alone were left of all his love for Rosalind. These remained to him as payment for the loss of his youth, bitter calomel under the thin sugar of love's exaltation. In his room he undressed and, wrapping himself in blankets to keep out the chill October air, drowsed in an armchair by the open window. He remembered a poem he had read months before. "O staunch old heart who toiled so long for me, I waste my years sailing along the sea." Yet he had no sense of waste, no sense of the present hope that waste implied. He felt that life had rejected him. Rosalind, Rosalind! He poured the words softly into the half-darkness, until she seemed to permeate the room. The wet salt breeze filled his hair with moisture. The rim of a moon seared the sky and made the curtains dim and ghostly. He fell asleep. When he awoke it was very late and quiet. The blanket had slipped partly off his shoulders, and he touched his skin to find it damp and cold. Then he became aware of a tense whispering not 10 feet away. He became rigid. "Don't make a sound." It was Alec's voice. "Jill, do you hear me?" "Yes," breathed very low, very frightened. They were in the bathroom. Then his ears caught a louder sound from somewhere along the corridor outside. It was a mumbling of men's voices and a repeated muffled rapping. Amory threw off the blankets and moved close to the bathroom door. "My God!" came the girl's voice again. "You'll have to let them in." "Shh!" Suddenly a steady, insistent knocking began at Amory's hall door, and simultaneously out of the bathroom came Alec, followed by the vermilion-lipped girl. They were both clad in pyjamas. "Amory! Amory!" An anxious whisper. "What's the trouble?" "It's house detectives. My God, Amory, they're just looking for a test case." "Well, better let them in." "You don't understand. They can get me under the Mann Act." The girl followed him slowly, a rather miserable, pathetic figure in the darkness. Amory tried to plan quickly. "You make a racket and let them in your room," he suggested anxiously, "and I'll get her out by this door." "They're here too, though. They'll watch this door." "Can't you give a wrong name?" "No chance. I registered under my own name. Besides, they trail the auto license number." "Say you're married." "Jill says one of the house detectives knows her." The girl had stolen to the bed and tumbled upon it, lay there listening wretchedly to the knocking which had grown gradually to a pounding. Then came a man's voice, angry and imperative. "Open up, or we'll break the door in." In the silence when his voice ceased, Amory realized that there were other things in the room besides people. Over and around the figure crouched on the bed there hung an aura, gossamer as a moonbeam, tainted as stale weak wine, yet a horror, diffusively brooding already over the three of them. And over by the window among the stirring curtains stood something else, featureless and indistinguishable, yet strangely familiar. Simultaneously two great cases presented themselves side by side to Amory. All that took place in his mind, then, occupied in actual time, less than 10 seconds. The first fact that flashed radiantly on his comprehension was the great impersonality of sacrifice. He perceived that what we call love and hate, reward and punishment, had no more to do with it than the date of the month. He quickly recapitulated the story of a sacrifice he had heard of in college. A man had cheated in an examination. His roommate in a gust of sentiment had taken the entire blame. Due to the shame of it, the innocent one's entire future seemed shrouded in regret and failure, capped by the ingratitude of the real culprit. He had finally taken his own life. Years afterward the facts had come out. At the time the story had both puzzled and worried Amory. Now he realized the truth.